this session is going to contrast King Ahaz and his son, King Hezekiah. This is found in 2 Chronicles chapter 28. Ahaz was king and reigned in Jerusalem for 16 years. He did not do what was pleasing in the sight of the Lord, as his ancestor David had done. Instead, he followed the example of the kings of Israel and cast images for the worship of Baal. He offered sacrifices in the valley of the son of Hinnom, even sacrificing his own sons in the fire. He imitated the detestable practices of the pagan nations, whom the Lord had driven from the land ahead of the Israelites. He offered sacrifices and burned incense at the pagan shrines and on the hills and under every green tree. This was Ahaz, the king of the southern kingdom, Judah, with the capital at Jerusalem. Whereas in the kingdom of Israel, there was another king, Pekah, I think it was. And God used the kingdom of Israel together with the kingdom of Aram, the Aramean king, both kings, to conquer the southern kingdom. Imagine, the two states of Israel, they were divided, and God used the northern kingdom to subjugate the southern kingdom, whose king at that time in the southern kingdom was Ahaz. And it says here, the armies of Israel also defeated Ahaz and inflicted many casualties in his army. So in a single day, Pekah, which is Israel's king, killed 120,000 of Judah's troops because they had abandoned the Lord, the God of their ancestors. And they not just did that, the armies of Israel captured 200,000 women and children from Judah and took tremendous amounts of plunder, which they took back to Samaria. And as they were taking them back to Samaria, people in Samaria who still has a heart for God said, "What are you doing? These are all people. We're the same people. Why are you taking them captives? Why are you treating them with such harshness?" So these people in Israel took pity on the captives from Judah, gave them food and drink and clothing, and said, "Send them back." So the weak they put on donkeys to be sent back to the south. That was how terrible it was. And even as Ahaz was being subjugated by the northern kingdom, he called on the king of Assyria, imagine an enemy king, to help him. The king then was Tiglath-Pileser, who at that time took advantage of the crisis between the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom of Israel. And he went over, he conquered every single city around there, and he was I forgot where he was. He was in Damascus, Aram. He had already conquered Aram. And King Ahaz went to Damascus to see him and said, "Please help me fight against the kingdom of Israel, my own people." But Tiglath-Pileser did not do anything. He took advantage of the situation, both to conquer the kingdom of Aram and also the northern kingdom. Though he died, and his son Sargon II finished the job and took over the destruction of the northern kingdom with Samaria as its capital and deported all the people. So that's how the 10 tribes were lost. And King Ahaz survived for a few more years before the attention was put by God on him in the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah. And we read of all the things that King Ahaz did. It's fascinating in the sense that he did not worship God. He worshipped the gods of the people around them. He went home one day after a battle and killed his oldest son, sacrificed him, the son who was going to be the next king. And that's how bad it was. That's how bad things were. And the prophet at the time in Jerusalem was Isaiah. Though Amos and Hosea were the prophets who were telling the people in Samaria, they're telling the people in the northern kingdom, be careful, the Lord will bring judgment on you. But they didn't listen, so the northern kingdom was lost. Now Isaiah was the prophet in the southern kingdom, again, telling one king after the other, Uzziah, Ahaz, and eventually Hezekiah, who was the son of Ahaz. And this is so very interesting. So this was the legacy of King Ahaz. And then when he died, King Hezekiah rose to the throne, and we hear of his reforms. He was a good man. In contrast to the actions of his father, King Hezekiah did what was right in the eyes of God. 2 Chronicles 29 to 32, the few chapters, detail the reforms of Hezekiah when he rose to the throne. And under previous kings like Ahab and Ahaz, the sin of the people in the southern kingdom of Judah was horrendous. 2 Chronicles 28 says, Ahaz, 2 Chronicles 28, sorry, not prepared here. And when trouble came to King Ahaz, he became even more unfaithful to the Lord. He offered sacrifices to the gods of Damascus, who had defeated him, for he said, these gods help the kings of Aram, so they can help me too. If I sacrifice to them. But instead they led to his ruin and the ruin of all Israel. The king took the utensils from the temple of God, broke them into pieces. He shut the doors of the Lord's temple so that no one could worship there, and then set up altars to pagan gods in every corner of Jerusalem. He made pagan shrines in the towns of Judah for offering sacrifices to the other gods. In this way, he aroused the anger of the Lord, the God of his ancestors. So there you have it, the state of the kingdom of Judah under these unfaithful kings. So when his son, King Ahaz's son, King Hezekiah, rose to the throne, he did what was right in the eyes of God. First, he reopened the temple at Jerusalem, which his father had closed. Broken, threw away. I mean, the temple at Jerusalem was totally defiled. He focused all his attention on the temple of Jerusalem, and for this he was criticized. It was a tremendous task. The temple was neglected since previous kings, Ahab and Ahaz, went to worship other gods. Ahaz built pagan shrines in all the towns of Judah for offering sacrifices to the other gods. King Hezekiah summoned the priests and Levites to the temple at Jerusalem. 2 Chronicles 29:15 says, the Levites, first they purified themselves, then they began to purify the temple of the Lord, just as the king had commanded. They were careful to follow all the Lord's instructions in their work. The priests went into the sanctuary of the temple of the Lord to cleanse it, and they took out all the defiled things they found. Verse 18, Then the Levites went to King Hezekiah. It says that the entire task of purifying the temple took 16 days. The temple was a very big, but it took them, even with a huge entourage of Levites and priests, took them 16 days to clean it, and which they finally did. And verse 18, then the Levites went to King Hezekiah with this report: we have purified the temple of the Lord, the altar of burnt offerings with all its utensils, and the table of the bread of the presence with all its utensils. We have also recovered all the utensils taken by King Ahaz when he was unfaithful and he closed the temple. They are now in front of the altar of the Lord, purified and ready for use. King Hezekiah then offered a sin offering for the kingdom, for the temple, and for Judah. Chapter 30 of 2 Chronicles detail what else King Hezekiah did. He now sent word to all Israel and to Judah, not just to his own kingdom of Judah, but to the northern kingdom too, and said, the temple of the Lord at Jerusalem is now ready to receive your offerings. It's now ready to be used for worship to the God of Israel. So King Hezekiah now sent word to all Israel and Judah. He wrote letters of invitation to Ephraim and Manasseh. He asked everyone to come to the temple of the Lord at Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover of the Lord, the God of Israel. Only God knows how long the temple has been closed, and no sacrifices made, no celebration of Passover, which is really an anathema to Judaism. This practice has been initiated in Egypt and gone on for centuries, and it's stopped by whom? Not by foreign kings and oppressors, but by Jewish people themselves. So, chapter 31, verse 4, in addition, he required the people in Jerusalem to bring the prescribed portion of their income to the priests and Levites, so they could devote themselves fully to the law of the Lord. In other words, King Hezekiah reinstituted the tithe. Chapter 32, and even as Hezekiah was doing all these reforms, he was being threatened by Sennacherib. We know previous postings that Sennacherib, even as Sennacherib was down south besieging Lachish, sent word. So now Hezekiah had to prepare Jerusalem for an imminent attack by Sennacherib.